People in our own backyards are hurting. There are insecurities around food, economics, mental health, access to justice, healthcare, and our society continues to become more divisive. But there is hope. Right here in Chicagoland, there are people and organizations who are on the front lines working to bring about positive and transformative change. Each week, we're going to meet some of these agents of change and examine how they are spurring innovative ideas and finding solutions to push our society forward in a more just direction. I'm Sufyan Sohel, and this is Change Agents. Good evening, Chicago. Around this time each year, many of us have vision boards or resolutions, which are used to help guide us in meeting the goals we have set for ourselves. Perhaps it is to work out more. Maybe it is to get a new job or to spend more time with our loved ones. Many of us may also reflect on finding our own identities, finding our power, to identify what we are good at. We may also seek to define our purpose. Maybe clarify what we are meant to do and become the people we hope to. My first guest tonight is a story keeper. He uses the concepts of power and purpose to empower Black and brown youth in Chicago to own their own creative careers, striving to equip the next generation with the resources, knowledge, and opportunities to thrive. I am so thrilled to have with us tonight David Johnson, founder of True Chicago and Kindred. David, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. So I've read your bio and we've talked a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your story. What were some of the challenges you saw in Chicago that made you want to create True Chicago?
Yeah, I have always loved to tell stories. And for me, that came to life through telling visual stories. I always worked as a photographer, but then also got into film a little bit as well. And one of the things that I loved was finding a way to tell stories that moved people in some way. And that first started abroad, traveling, places like Central America, East Africa, Asia. And what wound up happening is my own story wound up coming to life in the stories that I told. And the way that happened was, my background being from both, urban and suburban environments, I found that when I went to different places, those same environments existed and some of those same stories existed. And what I found when I came back was I didn't always see people that looked like me as the storytellers. So there would be diverse stories, but the storyteller oftentimes wasn't that diverse. And so right away in my work, I wanted to see ways that I could both challenge that and solve for that.
David, you raised an interesting point. Why is it so important to have diverse storytellers?
Yeah, I think that everyone lives in consistency with the story they believe themselves to be in. So when you leave here, you're going to carry out the actions consistent with the story that you think you're in. And that story came from somewhere. Most of the time, our story givers are people like our families, coaches, teachers, or the environment that we come from. But sometimes, especially in under-resourced spaces, the stories that are being proliferated within a community oftentimes don't come from that community. And so you find whole people groups living out a story that has been projected onto them, a narrative that's been projected onto them. And so it's important for people to understand their story within the context of someone who looks like them and also has a similar background.
Thank you. And would I be correct in stating that the more recent efforts of Hollywood, for example, to have more diverse voices from directors and actors, and how important it is for me to watch something and see myself and people like me on screen and other aspects of media?
Yeah, I like that you brought up that example because one of the analogies that I use sometimes when explaining this is, it's almost like imagining a film that you really love and that you really enjoy. And imagine watching that in subtitles. And we all, I love a good foreign film, but I'm usually tolerating the subtitles.
Sure.
And it's not something I prefer. And it sends this message that, yes, you can watch this movie, but it wasn't originally made for you. But then I could watch a movie or a film that I really love and it's in my own language. All of a sudden, what is that telling you is this is made for me. They had me in mind when they created this, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so I think going that extra mile and when we're talking about storytelling, figuring out what are the cultural fluencies, the cultural languages that need to be used to tell the story is always key.
I like that. I just watched The Prgssn on Netflix, and I loved how they incorporated the Asian heritage, languages, the dress, as part of the story that they were telling. And I think we need to see more of that across.
I said, like I had seen it, but I'm just gonna be honest, I haven't seen it.
It's great. I mean, but it does what you're saying 100%. And I think we just need to see more of that, of that visualization, that understanding of that we are diverse, and it always can't be a white portrayal of all these diverse voices that we have in this country or elsewhere around the world.
Yep.
So tell me about True Chicago.
Yeah, True Chicago kind of started as something that came out of my own story. I remember I was getting ready for my graduation day from college, and this was a big deal because I honestly wasn't that great of a student. And specifically, I always struggled with writing papers. And I had a friend that went out of his way to help me learn how to write a paper. And I remember the night before my graduation just feeling this sense of gratitude for all the people that had helped me. And I reached out to some of them, and one of them was my friend Andrew, who had helped me learn how to write a paper. And I just said, hey man, thanks. The next morning, he emailed me back and said, hey, I just moved to Ethiopia, and I was actually thinking of you. And I know you like to take pictures. I have a friend here in Ethiopia who owns a local newspaper and would love to offer you the opportunity to come out and be the photographer for the newspaper. I was on a plane 2 weeks later, and that kind of launched my photography career. I moved there for a little bit, came back, wasn't there for too long, but once I came back, I just put on a gallery for friends and family. One of the people in attendance was a friend of a friend, and he said, hey, I love your photos. I'm a global creative director for Motorola, and I would love to feature you in our next shoot. And so I did that. It went well, and it led to, for about the next 2 years or so, working on several campaigns with Motorola. And that launched a career in commercial photography. Once I got to commercial photography, I realized, wow, I don't see anybody else that looks like me, or like you, or anything like that. I'd be up for a job and it would be me and 3 or 4 other middle-aged white dudes.
Sure.
And these are jobs for Google or for Microsoft or whoever. And my feeling was, only reason why I'm here is because so many people invested in me, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And what I realized is the only reason why there isn't other people that look like me wasn't because they didn't have the talent, it was because they didn't have the opportunity. So I just really wanted to start a space. We started a small workshop, and we were hoping to have 20 or 30 people to come, and 75 showed up. And True Chicago was born, and it really just became an ecosystem for young Black and brown creatives.
That's amazing, and I love the story from Ethiopia, and I thank you for walking us through that to Motorola and that. So you've been, since 2017, True Chicago. How many young artists have you mentored and collaborated with? And
yeah, I mean, honestly, if it were just me, it'd be a really small amount, but
Yeah.
I've had an incredible team come around us and be able to reach a lot of people. When we started that first year, was 2017, was about 75 to 100 people that we reached. Fast forward to 2023, over all of our programming throughout the year, we reached over 2,500 young people. And then it's basically started to grow. We're starting Kansas City, and we're about to start in St. Louis as well.
What are you hearing from those communities that made you want to go there and create this there?
Yeah, I think there were some things we wanted to interrupt.
Okay.
And I think the first thing that I realized that I wanted to interrupt was this notion that Black and brown young people that are creative had to find a way to constantly compete with the other Black and brown people to basically find a way into the few spots available in the diversity world that we live in. The people that they need to be the one Black person or the one brown person or whatever. But instead I realized, man, what would it look like for you to just be the best you could be and be focused on that? And once we did that, we saw talent sort of sprout out of the ground, where folks weren't worried about, is my image better than the next person's? Is my song better than that person's song? But instead, let me just worry about what's alive inside of me. One, that competitive mindset is very performative. It is very like, I want to impress you and the audience. But then the other mindset that was seeking to find the best inside of me was really just tapping into something authentic and tapping into something that was always unique over and over again. And so we just wanted to find a way to create a space for that was a little kind of countercultural, and it wound up growing.
That's so great. How now do you stay engaged with those that have come through True Chicago, and what keeps you doing this work?
Yeah. I always say that there's two most important things in life, and neither one of them are money. Time and relationships, I think, are the most important resources that we have. You could have all the money in the world, but if you don't have those two things, you're dead, basically.
Right.
And so what I have found is if I can spend whatever wealth of time or relationships that I have in the next generation, in making space for them to grow and step into their power, it's almost like planting seeds in a garden where you plant them and they start to do their own thing. And that's a big philosophy that we have in True Chicago, is that nobody who comes to any of our programming is in lack. You're not coming to find the thing that you're missing. You're coming to activate what you already have, and what you already have is more than enough.
David, thank you so much for sharing your story and your work with us tonight. We'll be right back with our next guest.
I'm Bianca Cotton. On a new episode of Behind the Confident Smile, I'll be sitting in conversation with Janice Nelson.
Before then, it was just even the fear of finishing, because I had been to school multiple times and didn't finish. Now I finish.
Join the conversation on CAN TV, cable channel 19, and streaming on cantv.org and CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
Welcome back. My next guest tonight is a creative director and graphic designer based in Chicago. He specializes in unique storytelling through a Black lens. Deeply connected to his community, he uses art as a platform to highlight injustice while creating items that start a dialogue around solutions. He is a proud owner of Prgssn, a clothing brand focused on recreating moments in Black history via apparel. I am so pleased to have with me today Olu Adeleke.
Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining me.
Of course.
Olu, I am a storyteller too, and I resonate a lot with people who use different platforms to share the stories of themselves and their communities. I'm really intrigued on why you chose clothing to share the Black story.
Yeah, I think ever since I was a kid, I've always really been into clothes. I remember.
You look great.
I appreciate it. So like I remember during the pandemic, actually, I was cleaning, my room when it first had started, and I actually found a piece of paper from 2014, which would have been my freshman year of high school. And on that piece of paper was this thing called Shark Clothing. And so by the time 2020 had came around, I was probably doing my brand for 4 years. And 2020 was the year I started doing it very seriously. And so I think in a very serendipitous way, it just showed me that even since I was a kid, as the child of Nigerian immigrants who thought he was going to medical school his entire life, me making clothes makes the most amount of sense. And so specifically when I started the brand back in 2016, at the time there was a lot of fashion clothing coming out which had really, really nice stories, but the clothes oftentimes felt really corny. And so I was asking myself, how do I pair intentional storytelling with like good design and bring them back into one place so that if you are a fan of clothing, you would want to wear it. If you're a fan of storytelling, you would want to wear it. And if you were a fan of both, you would think I was coming up with the greatest thing in the world. And so that's why I choose clothing, because clothes oftentimes are the best way you can represent yourself without even saying a word.
Oh, you're right. Go into that second part, that you're using clothing to even start conversations about finding solutions to some of the challenges faced by our communities.
For sure. I think the two most popular titles for my brand are Black Women Are the Future and Let Black Boys Be. And it's interesting. I think there's a lot of power in the tongue. And so I put a lot of intention for it when I work on my clothes. And even since the beginning, the number one thing I've always said is I want my clothes to start a dialogue. And that has been what has happened. I always have customers tell me, yo, no matter where I go, at least one person stops me and has a conversation about either Black Women Are the Future or Let Black Boys Be, or whatever, saying is on the back of their item. And so, real conversations happen with people in real time. And that dialogue is really important because kind of what was spoken about earlier, but that idea of representation is people see themselves in the clothes. And so as a result, there is a certain connection where as the wearer, you feel like it's almost like your superhero costume. And I think as someone who's visualizing it or just seeing it on the street, you feel seen, right? You're like, wow, that's a really, really strong statement. But it's also a statement that's not like open to interpretation, right? It is what it is, right? It is definitive. Black women are the future, right? Giving Black boys the space to just be, right? And those are the solutions that I'm looking for, right? Getting past the idea of trying to be comfortable in a white world and essentially creating a universe for Black people to be front and present in there and never have to ask themselves, am I allowed to wear this? In the same way they oftentimes have to ask themselves about that in other brands.
Am I allowed to wear this?
And I'm very happy you asked that, right? Because yes, you are, right? Just like Black people are allowed to wear Yves Saint Laurent or like Louis Vuitton, right?
Sure.
But the difference is when you are putting on these clothing, the idea is you understand that it was made for Black people. Anyone can wear it, right? But like this is a brand in which I want to center my community, and that's what we do.
I love that, and great work on that.
Yeah, appreciate it.
I just had David here,
Yeah.
who talked about True Chicago, and you were part of True Chicago, or are part of True
Yes, I
Chicago.
am.
Can you tell a little bit about that experience and how it impacted your life?
100%. I always tell people that David is probably the most important person I've met in my adult life, and I genuinely mean that. I've had a lot of people come up to me and see something special, and I think that like David is the first person who's actually poured into me without wanting anything in return. And so when I think about my relationship with True Chicago, that is what it represents, right? David is really, really big on this idea that you have everything that you need in your toolkit already. And so his role is just essentially identifying some of these places where you can flourish. And so one of the great opportunities I had while working with True Chicago, I was an apprentice for their Molson Coors internship. And it was my first opportunity to actually work as a creative director in a professional capacity, right? And that did a lot of validation for me. So before this moment, all of my experience was always just through word of mouth, and I was doing designs for my friends and family. And don't get me wrong, like some of those opportunities were really big, but I never actually had any real agency experience. I never had any real creative experience in a professional way. And that 6-week internship I had eventually turned into a 6-month internship scholarship because of how impressed they were with my work, and ultimately gave me the skill set I needed to learn how to navigate as a creative professionally, which is something that I didn't know how to do before I essentially met David. Yeah.
That really makes me happy to just hear how highly you speak of him and the value that working with him and True Chicago had. Yeah. Why are those sorts of relationships important, and why is it extra important for especially some of our most impacted communities and artists from impacted communities to have that sort of access?
Yeah. I think in a really funny and roundabout way, I think of Jimmy Neutron a lot. Jimmy Neutron is like supposed to be the world's smartest kid, but he's like in a super small town. And so that's what I think about oftentimes when it comes to people in our community as well. Some of the smartest and brightest people like exist in our communities but never get the opportunity, because what I've learned the older I get is it's not about how talented you are, it's about who you know. And so I think when you talk about like what David is doing, it's just that, right? It's literally saying, hey, you're an extremely talented person, right? But like, you wouldn't have the opportunity to be in these circles if you don't know the right people. And so I always tell people, whenever they ask me, how do you get these opportunities? I tell them don't get me wrong, I deserve to be here because I've worked for it, but I also wouldn't be here if I didn't know who the right person was. And so it sucks that we oftentimes live in that world, but like that's the whole point as well, I think, is each one, teach one. So it's like, that's what my new objective is now, right? Is once again, finding people within my community and bringing them along for the ride as well, and placing them in rooms that they otherwise would not be in if they didn't know the right people. And I think that, that's the world we live in, but also the beautiful side on the other side is like, when you find people who genuinely care about you, you'll flourish. And that's what I've had the opportunity to do.
I like that, and we can go a lot of different directions here. I'm going back to something you said earlier about your Nigerian parents wanting you to be a doctor. Yeah. My Indian parents, same exact thing. I went to law school instead, and doing public interest law, so not quite what they imagined. But a challenge I face, which you talked about, is I didn't have people opening doors for me. I didn't have people creating space for me at their tables. Why is that so important, I think, for a majority of non-white communities? Yeah. Why don't those already exist?
Why they don't exist, we can, have a whole long conversation, right? Just like the systems that exist. But oftentimes, like, I think it's because people oftentimes aren't looking in those communities. And if they are, they're only looking for the ones that, may be able to assimilate a little bit easier. And so the ones that oftentimes need those opportunities the most are the ones who don't get them the most, because like they're the ones who are in the right places, or the ones who don't want to necessarily assimilate. And so when you meet someone who accepts you for who you are and still says, I'm going to keep this door open, that's when you see breakthroughs start happening. That's when you say like, hey, like this person's work is absolutely amazing. What took the world so long to recognize this, right? It was the right person saying like, I want you to show up as who you are at all times, and I'm gonna back you up. And I think that that's what David and just True Chicago does as a whole, right? Show up as yourself and we'll open up those doors, but just make sure you radically are yourself at all times.
Olu, thank you so much for sharing your work, your story. I'm going to check out your website and see which shirt I can get and wear. And I wish you nothing but the best of luck with Prgssn.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with this week's Change in Action.
I'm Rich Robbins, inviting you to join us for an all-new episode of Soft and Tender, where we'll be discussing how our fathers and father figures planted seeds of compassion that helped us manifest into the men we are today.
I see black fathers. I see them around. I see them in Inglewood. I see that.
I look forward to seeing you on Monday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN-TV cable channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or the CAN-TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
This week in Change in Action, we'll meet Erica Barbosa from Equal Hope. A breast cancer survivor herself, Erica is a staunch advocate for breast cancer prevention and treatment.
I am Erica Barbosa. I am with Equal Hope, and their mission is to save lives, and save lives they do. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and they're still in my life. They're wonderful. They see you as a person, not just a sick person, and the support that they give you is just phenomenal. Cancer alone is the word, it's like really scary. And when we go to the doctor, as myself as a patient, you really don't hear anything or you forget to ask questions. Equal Hope is there to help the women understand when we're told we have cancer. Sometimes we don't understand what we're going to go through, what's our treatment. And I really believe if they weren't in my life, I wouldn't be here. They signed me up with the insurance. They got me a team of doctors, from my oncologist to my plastic surgeon. So everything I needed in my journey, they supplied to me. I had a doctor's appointment with the oncologist right after my surgery to talk about my treatment plan. And I wasn't comfortable with the doctor. I was scared. I didn't know if I could change doctors. The information normally for me in the past, because I didn't have an advocate, it was okay, you stay with the doctor, you do the doctor's instructions, but Equal Hope taught me that if I wasn't comfortable with that doctor, I could change, and that's what they did for me. Being comfortable as a patient with the doctors, you see, it's very important. It is very crucial when people go through cancer that they have the support. The support is what gets us through, knowing somebody is there and fighting for us. If you have any concerns, any worries, just contact Equal Hope, and early detection saves lives.
Power and purpose. These words resonate so strongly tonight. They resonate with Erica's inspiring story and the transformative power of Equal Hope. They resonate with the work of True Chicago that is empowering Chicago's young artists to take ownership over their own creative, supporting them not only as individuals, but to have lasting investment into the health of their communities. Thank you so much to David and to Olu for joining us tonight. Thank you for your inspiring and incredible work that you shared with me and all of our viewers tonight. John F. Kennedy said that efforts and courage are not enough without purpose and direction. As we all think about our respective power and purpose, we should also think about our collective power and purpose. What can we do together to bring positive change to our communities? Like David and Olu, what can we do to empower others, elevate their stories, and work towards solutions to the challenges faced by those around us? My friends, we can all be change agents. Let us all be change agents. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I will see you next week.